Vishaps have been a common enemy in Genshin Impact since early on in the game's life. The ancient evil hidden beneath the Dragon Queller tree, too, was left there in plain sight for us to find through Jiu's dialogue, long before the Trounce domain associated with it was ever released. It'd be easy to follow Ajdaha's story back to Zhongli's contract with him and think that's as far back as the story goes. It is, after all, true that Zhongli is among the oldest currently living beings in Teyvat, as far as we know. But deep beneath the ocean depths, somewhere in that empty stretch of ocean that intersects between the coasts of Inazuma, Sumeru, and Liyue, we learned a hidden truth that is older still, older than Teyvat as we know it. Today, I'll be taking you on a deep dive into the lore behind the Vishaps and the Realm of Light, including diving into some real-world myths and translations to bolster what we know. I'm Ganymede of the Hexen Zircle, and I'll be your guide to the original inhabitants of Teyvat before the shaping of the world and the primordial life that dwelled in the Light Realm. Before we get started, I'll be spoiling all of Zhongli's story quests as well as a good deal of Enkanomiya, and maybe touching briefly on stuff all the way up to the 3.3 Archon quests. Please be mindful of spoilers before continuing. Dragons. The word dragon comes up left and right in Genshin Impact and is used to refer to several life forms that seem at first glance to be extremely different from each other. When the original inhabitants of Teyvat are mentioned by the scribes of Enkanomiya, they are primarily called Vishaps, but also referred to as the Dragon Heirs, the words Vishap and Dragon being used more or less interchangeably in the English text. The original inhabitants of Teyvat were beings who dwelt in a realm known as the Light Realm by the scribes of Enkanomiya. Its elemental flows were described as raging torrents in comparison to the ley lines of the human realm that the Primordial One created after subjugating the Vishaps. In the book series, Breeze Amidst the Forest, Devalin's birth is alluded to like this. Typically, when life arises from the elements, it either descends and becomes a slime or ascends and becomes a crystal fly. Rarely does this process give rise to dangerous elemental monsters. Elemental dragons are rarely seen and have the powers to match the gods of old. This suggests that Devalin too is a dragon in exactly the sense of the word used by the scribes of Enkanomiya, though it could be entirely up to debate as to whether or not he counts as a sovereign or not. I'd like to also mention the Key of Yure, also said to be a sea monster of sorts that inhabited both Liyue and the sea surrounding it. Osail and Basht are probably among these beings, but more on that later. It's especially important to note here that when the Primordial One waged war against the Seven Sovereigns at the beginning of time, at least the human reckoning, that those who were not vanquished and refused to yield fled into the ocean depths. This brings to mind what is said to have happened after the Archon War much later, with the gods who were not vanquished fleeing into the outer reaches of Teyvat, known as the Dark Sea. History does truly repeat itself in Teyvat, after all. The archived description for the Bolt-Eater baptismal Vishap states, a Vishap that dwells deep beneath the oceans. Due to certain social adaptations, it has manifested a form aligned with the electro-element. Following the fading of the Seven Sovereigns' power, a new generation of sovereigns is presently being born. But now that the baptismal Vishaps have evolved in this manner, they have lost their purity. As such, the Dragon of Water will no longer be born from among their ranks. Prophecy holds that the new Dragon of Water will definitely descend in the form of a human. The diversification of their elemental properties was largely forced by the experiments done on them by the researchers in Enkanomiya, suggesting that the type of Vishap that naturally inhabited the area where the city, formerly known as Delphi, fell, were almost entirely of the water-aspected type. We know that the original Seven Sovereigns were dragons or Vishaps who were pure manifestations of the seven elements and ruled over 7 nations that were aspected to those elements, much like in modern Teyvat. At some point in its prehistory, legends hold that the lands of Teyvat were ravaged by the elements, endless fires, blizzards, storms, etc., that made the lands harsh and uninhabitable. It is said that the arrival of envoys from the heavens helped quell these elemental disasters, and thus began the era where envoys of Celestia would walk among men and guide them, which brings to mind the various different types of elemental Seelie we can encounter throughout the world. Some sources say that this period came after the time of Delphi's fall into the depths during the Second War, which does make sense on the surface, as envoys of Celestia seem to be an occurrence that coincided with the Second Who Came's change in rule. But I can't help but wonder if the elements running amok has something to do with the torrents of elemental energy regarding the realms of the Seven Sovereigns and the Light Realm itself, though we don't really have enough information to be sure one way or the other. One popular theory suggests that the remains of the Seven Sovereigns are found in the various elemental hypostases throughout the world, while another suggests that they were used to create the Gnosis the Archons now wield. Out of those two theories, I think that the hypostasis theory is the most likely, as the Gnosis did not appear until the Archon War as far as we're aware. But again, who knows for sure? The legends surrounding the Vishaps suggest that the Sovereigns will be reborn, though only the Sovereign of Water is mentioned directly, and it is said to have to be reborn as a human, since the Enconomians forced the Baptismal Vishaps to evolve into cryo and electro-aspected forms rather than their native water form. The nature of dragons paints them as pure primordial representations of the elements they are born from, and the two most prominent examples we have of this, Ajdaha and Devalin, certainly fit the bill. Ajdaha. Ajdaha is said to be the very eldest of Geo-Vishaps, having been slumbering deep within the earth for an unknown and likely immense amount of time before Morax found and took pity on him. At that time, Ajdaha had already begun to awaken and likely would have eventually regained enough strength to break through the earth on his own, so it's probably a good thing that Morax found him and took pity on him, or else there would have almost definitely been another immediate elemental disaster on Liyue's hands. Not that it would stop exactly that coming to pass many years later, of course. He is said to be as ancient as the mountains themselves, and even Zhongli, who we know as likely the oldest living being we've personally met so far, suggests that Ajdaha is older than he can even comprehend, as he says to him, "I do not pretend to match your rhetoric when it comes to the subject of a life long lived. I fear that the life of an elemental being is longer than any in this world." At the time of Zhongli's second story quest's release, which gave us the bulk of Ajdaha's lore, this was something that was likely overlooked. There was no frame of reference for it. But after Enconomia, it became an eye-opening comment that nearly feels like forbidden knowledge in and of itself. Zhongli knows and acknowledges that the elemental beings, the Vishaps or dragon heirs, have been around since time immemorial, a time so distant that it's ancient even to him. One of the most important connections between Ajdaha and the Seven Sovereigns of the original Natural Order of Teyvat is the fact that the items he drops, Dragon Lord's Crown and Blood Jade Branch, as well as Ajdaha's Chinese name, refer to him as the Dragon Lord or Dragon King, a title also shared with the Seven Sovereigns. In the description of Beneath the Dragon Queller, the Trounce domain, Ajdaha is referred to as the Lord of Vishaps, a description reused in the English localization in the Light Beneath the Shadow, to refer to the Dragon of Water whose second coming is prophesied when it is mentioned in Enconomia. In Amidst Chaos, the Rock is Unmoved, Ajdaha's dialogue references Zhongli's ascension, likening him to the sun. "So here lies the wisdom of the gods. Destroy all deemed redundant, enlist tyrants to ravage the wilderness. Humans, they only care about history since the dawn of the age of mankind. All powers under heaven rise and fall of land and sea. A star appears within the wild. A sun ascends as bright as jade. No, it is I, Ajdaha, forged of elemental crystal, bearer of the weight and memories of the earth, older than the mountains and the oceans that decides. I will not swear allegiance to this insect." Later on, Ajdaha talks about a secret beyond all comprehension of youthful humanity and ancient dragon kind. It seems that this references the tale of him meeting Morax, and yet I can't help but feel that this dialogue also must vaguely reference the time before the coming of the Primordial One, and looking at it that way, him suggesting that the Archons are tyrants enlisted to ravage the wilderness hits pretty heavy. Here, I'd also like to break down some translation discrepancies with regards to Ajdaha in particular. Ajdaha claims in the English that he was forged of elemental crystal, while the Chinese is more directly born from elemental crystallization, suggesting that he was born in much the same way Devalin was, but through geoenergy rather than animo. The title of Dragon Lord is also Beto's epithet and written with the exact same Chinese characters, though this is in reference to her slaying of the sea monster Haishan. In my opinion, this is another small reference that confirms that the sea monsters known as Key, such as Osail and Bashed, are also primordial dragons, descended from or even of the same brood as the original Vishaps of Teyvat. On top of all that, I can't help but look at how Ajdaha's Blood Jade branch is almost ridiculously similar to the Blood Branch Coral from Enkinomia, though that also opens up the question as to whether or not he's one of the original Sovereign or a Vishap that escaped Enkinomia's experiments. Zhongli remembers the time of the chasm's creation and the fall of the Seelie race, which coincides with the fall of Delphi into the depths, so that either strengthens or weakens any theories with regard to that, depending on how you look at it. My take is that maybe this kind of branch-like body part is a phenomenon that occurs when a Vishap has been altered and tampered with, as both Ajdaha and the Vishaps in Enkinomia are. Here, I'd also mention that Vishaps evolved to be sightless, which Ajdaha was until Morax fashioned him a pair of eyes. Some more aspects of this reveal itself in an interview with the creative team regarding Ajdaha. Here are some key excerpts. His name is derived from Ajidahaka, which means dragon in Old Persian. Ajdaha is an enormous, terrible creature in Iranian mythology, and in Iranian culture means something sinister that is hidden for a long time, but will one day emerge. The reason for selecting this name is to imply that in the game, this huge hidden danger will one day reveal itself suddenly. This name was the initial inspiration for his entire design, and many subsequent design details revolved around the meaning of this name. Ajdaha can be deemed as a representation of nature, whereas humans represent the spirit of expansion and development. So, what kind of damage will be done to nature in the process of mankind's continuous exploration and usage of nature? We thought that this was one of the vantage points we could use in the designing of Ajdaha. Manny Calavera, creative concept and writing team. I feel that these little insights also hint to Ajdaha's connection to the prehistory of Teyvat, and the primordial nature of his connection to the elements, as the Vishaps civilization in the Light Realm also had. I think that the idea of Ajdaha representing the primal forces of nature versus the sense of the developed world where humans dwell is a direct parallel with the birth of the human realm and the subjugation of the original Light Realm and its great elemental energy flows. The Primo Vishap and Lesser Vishaps. The description of the Juvenile Jade dropped from the Primo Vishap reads, a crystalline substance taken from a Primo Vishap. Within it contained the potential to become a dragon. These dull crystals are precipitated within the bodies of Vishaps sleeping in the mountains. Liyue folklore holds that they will gather power over many years, after which this crystal will at last replace their original heart, and the Vishap will become a true dragon, one that can shake the mountains and split the earth. Much like the rumor of Vishap people we heard from Enjo and Enkinomia, this particular bit of folklore is discussed with much contradiction. While one source might say a Vishap can become a dragon, another will deny this claim. Of course, this was another snippet of lore that was little more than a bit of colloquial folklore for fun until Enkinomia blew the whole of Teyvat's recorded history wide open. The Juvenile Jade closely resembles the Irminsul fruit from the Energy Amplifier event, and one of those domains even involved Vishaps stealing the fruit fragments, seemingly in search of fostering these crystal cores in themselves, according to the domain description. A group of Vishaps that have consumed an Irminsul fruit fragment have dominion over this domain. When defeated, the digested fragments will manifest themselves as volatile high-energy crystal cores. This continues to reiterate what the researchers in Enkinomia concluded, that the Vishaps are sentient, intelligent beings likely with as much self-awareness and intelligence as humans. Now we know that Vishaps and dragons are in fact linked, and are more or less one and the same type of being, or at least were once before their hold over the world was broken. In the Adventurer's Handbook, it suggests that the Academia has at least some knowledge of this in the Geo-Vishap hatchling description. A young Vishap with a hard geo-exoskeleton. Vishaps are exceptionally agile creatures that one would be wise not to underestimate in battle. Experts from Sumeru academia believe that they become dragons when fully grown. By avoiding predators and natural disasters, perhaps they can even live long enough to become formidable beasts that reign over entire mountains. It is maintained that from each elemental Vishap race, that the sovereign of their kind will be born anew. This prophecy crops up in Enkanomiya, and as far as I know, we have no reason to doubt this. I think back on the banned children's riddle from the Byakuya collection that may very well be the source of this prophecy. It reads thusly. Question 6. A father has 12 children, each then giving birth to 60 daughters of different appearances. Of them, 30 are pale and 30 are dark. The whole family, knowing not death, will only fade away. Who is the father? Answer. The answer is the year. The people of Byakuya may find the part about 60 pale or dark granddaughters a bit confusing, but everything will start to make sense once they crack question 4. There used to be a sequel to this riddle in ancient times. It roughly said that every granddaughter would give birth to 12 descendants, and each of them would then have 60 children. Every such child later would give birth to another 60 who would go on to have children of their own. This would continue until at last all the offspring would together give birth to the one and only primordial child, Tokoyo Ookami, the mother of 14 billion years. Watatsumi Omikami forbade people from spreading this riddle. While at first glance this seems to be just a reference to explain that Tokoyo Ookami, or Kairos, the Thousand Winds, is all of time, she is usually referred to specifically as the god of moments. I think that this banned riddle is a reference to the inevitable reincarnation of even vanquished deities and heroes, as Teyvat has shown us time and time again. The sovereigns will be reborn anew because they must be. Istaroth will be reborn too if she currently is no more, because that is the literal law of Teyvat's universe. This too, I think, must fall into the realm of the forbidden knowledge that sealed Orobashi's fate, otherwise he wouldn't have banned the riddle. The Dragon of Water is said to be the Lord of the Baptismal Vishaps. Due to the Baptismal Vishaps' forced changes to Cryo and Electro, they are now considered to be biologically impure, and an Enkanomian prophecy claims that the Dragon of Water will be born anew as a human. In the Byakuya collection, one of the researchers says that they must prevent the Dragon of Water from being born in Enkanomiya at any cost, and their initial forced mutations of the Vishaps seem to have been driven by this goal, though later ones involved the introduction of Orobashi's blood to grow blood branch coral from them for the future sustainability of Watatsumi Island. They forced the Vishaps' evolution to diverge into contemporary elements, Cryo and Electro, the only two not included in the original classical elements that were listed in the research document, likely in order to try to prevent this reincarnation from happening. Of course, we know that the Loom of Fate is not so easily toyed with, and the likelihood that we may very well come across the rebirth of this Dragon of Water on our journey, maybe in the next step, which takes us to the land of Hydro, is pretty high in my opinion. As I've said before, Chekhov's gun. Or maybe we have already witnessed this. Actually, directly right in front of us, the person who most vehemently denies the existence of so-called Vishap people is Kokomi, and I just, has anyone looked at her constellation? Anyone? I honestly feel like I almost never hear anyone bring Kokomi up, and yet here she is, very likely the incarnation of the Lord of Water. Her constellation is literally translated to Sleeping Dragoness. It's pretty obviously a Vishap. I mean, we have no reason to believe that this reborn sovereign would be innately evil. Even Ajdaha is not, so I mean, it could also be a red herring, but the name of the constellation itself is enough to sell me when comparing it to everyone else's. Not to mention her skill when it comes to war, and feeling that she understands strategy better than the hearts of other humans. So, that's 3 sovereigns already accounted for: water, earth, and of course, wind. Devalin. We know that Devalin is at least as old as the time that Mondstadt was locked in eternal winter, when gods walked among us in their prime. Then he mentions him having been such a gentle child, which suggests he meant Devalin shortly after his birth. Well, it's entirely possible that the time during which the elements ravaged Teyvat might be the time that is referenced here, as there was in fact a previous ice age that seems to be unrelated to Boreas's winter, or the texts are just vague enough that we can't be sure. He could be much older than that. All of that said, Venti is hinted to be younger than Zhongli, though by how much is never stated. What I wouldn't give to know all of the things from Zhongli's early life he's seen, but anyway. Devalin was, as I said before, born in the high heavens from a convergence of elemental energy and often caused havoc in his early days by not knowing his own strength and how frightening his size was to mortals. It seems that these elemental beings of the Light Realm are largely born in this way, and with Azhdaha and Devalin, we have two accounts of it. Devalin, much like how Azhdaha had been in a deep slumber beneath the earth when Zhongli found him, can also go into deep slumber for long periods of time if he so chooses, but it seems the Archons can also do this, as it is suggested that Venti had gone into a long slumber before Duren attacked. But this could also just be the interpretation of mortals noting their god's absence and assuming that he must be slumbering if he was not walking among them. All the while, Venti likely was doing just that, or traveling without a care in the world knowing him. A large part of what we know about Devalin coincides with the calamity in Conria and his battle with Duren. One interesting fact that I came across was the fact that the Thousand Winds could not cleanse the clouds of poison left in Duren's wake, but Devalin could. This not only gives us an exciting hint that Istaroth was active not only in Inazuma with the planting of the sacred Sakura tree, but also in Mondstadt during the time period of the calamity. I imagine as the god of time, things like distance are of little concern to her. But most interesting is the suggestion that Devalin is so immensely powerful that he could do things that one of the oldest divine beings in Teyvat could not. Perhaps this is just a factor of the purity of his elemental density, once again harkening back to the Light Realm and the primordial elemental beings. Much like Azhdaha and Duren, Devalin possessed a strong desire to be loved and accepted by humanity. I wonder if this is an ongoing theme due to the fact that the Vishaps were sovereign gods in their own right, and even their current incarnations remember this and long to be worshipped. With a clear depiction of Devalin's origins, I think it's clear that he is at the very least a being of the Light Realm, if not the direct incarnation of the Sovereign of Wind. I find it interesting that his power is often referred to as just that, wind power, and when Venti blesses him with his power upon freeing him from the corruption of the Abyss, he exclaims, "So this is the power of the Animo Archon," again as though to make a small differentiation between the two. One might assume that the sovereigns oversaw different incarnations of the elements, which is further supported by a text from the Byakuya-koku collection, which lists the elements thusly: earth, water, fire, wind, ether, and void. For the sake of clarity, ether means the light of the uppermost part of the sky, so we can interpret these last two elements as light and dark, which seem to be missing from Teyvat's normal elements and are replaced by cryo and electro. I also assume that dendro is more or less included within the earth element. One more little thing of note is that Devalin's design is likely based on the Glaucus atlanticus, or blue sea dragon, which is a shellless gastropod mollusk or sea slug, further solidifying his ties to the primordial dragon heirs who were largely associated with the sea. Of course, we can't really talk about Devalin without mentioning his counterpart, who is perhaps the most mysterious out of the bunch that I'd like to look at. Duren. For all we know about Duren, we don't know that much. We know he was possibly an artificially created life form, though there's a chance that Gold started with an elemental being or Vishap in her lab and created Duren from that, but that cannot be confirmed one way or another. Though it certainly makes sense that an alchemist obsessed with primordial life might create a dragon on their way to perfecting the art. After all, the dragons were the eldest form of life we know of in Teyvat. When I first started taking notes on this, I asked myself several times what Duren's element was, as a dragon is a purely elemental being, yes? But the only sort of power Duren is described as having seems to be that of corruption and poison. Poison might well hint that he was actually dendro-aspected, which would be interesting on its own. But I'd like to put forth the hypothesis that Duren was in fact aspected not to one of the current 7 elements, but to one of the original primordial ones, Void. He's called the Shadow Dragon, after all. In the cutscene that shows his appearance, he seems to be wreathed in flame, but I can't recall any instance suggesting that he specifically breathed fire, while we know Devalin has powerful wind-aspected breath attacks. The more I look at Duren's design, the more I find myself lingering on the idea that Duren might have been neither a fully synthetic elemental being or one that had simply been altered. The fact that he is almost entirely skeletal, save for some vital organs, which makes the tale of how Devalin tore out his throat a bit strange, brings to mind a being that was perhaps resurrected through something not unlike necromancy. We also know that Gold had already begun her primordial human project at the point of Duren's creation, having fed the failed Albedo clone to Duren before the calamity, and the dragon's inevitable demise. Honestly, I can't help but wonder if this event had something to do with the poor creature going mad, and I hope we'll find out more about that particular event in the future. So, assuming that dragons are all these pure elemental beings regardless of classification, Gold most definitely had to have by this point come into contact with the forbidden knowledge about Teyvat's prehistory and the fact that there were Vishaps before the Primordial one and the Primordial one before Celestia. Maybe we'll never know what Duren's true elemental power was, as he was too corrupted by the time he left Conria for anyone to be able to tell. The three possibilities remain: Void, of the classical ancient elements likely from before time; Dendro, due to his ability to spread poison gas clouds; or Pyro, due to the one depiction we have of him, well, full of fire. I'll leave it up to all of you to decide for yourselves, as there is no truly definitive answer. I will note that in Enkanomiya's experiments on the dragon heirs, they claimed that no matter what conditions they forced on them, they never witnessed one take on the element of Pyro, so there's that strike against that option for you. For all of our talk about Gold's ambition and her being called the greatest sinner and all that, if we harken back to the civilization of Salvin Dagnir, we must remember its princess with prophetic powers. She foresaw Duren's coming to the mountain eons before it was ever a possibility, and that leaves us with a couple of possibilities of our own to explore. Either the fate of that moment was truly written in stone, as many fated events in Teyvat seem to be, or perhaps Gold already existed even that early on, and her desires, which drew the abyss to her, are what created the outcome. That's a bit tinfoil hatty, but this particular line of research put a tantalizing and somewhat terrifying thought into my head. If you'll excuse me, a completely purely self-indulgent theory that probably has almost no basis in anything whatsoever but my hunches, I got to thinking, what if Gold is actually one of the four shades of the Primordial one? Maybe Istaroth herself, maybe another. Why else would she be so keen to what primordial life is and seek to recreate it? Perhaps all she wanted was to return to the glory of the old days and create new life, as was the will of her and the beings who she is a reflection of. Perhaps that is why she was powerful enough to escape Conria's calamity seemingly unscathed and simply continue her research, finally able to master the art in having created Albedo. Well, with that out of my system, I have to move on to the next solid lead in the search of the dragon heirs. The Key of Yure. One of the earliest world quests I remember really grabbing my attention was this one. Back then, it was erroneously called the Key of Yure, as the character it was written with was mistaken to be the same as the one used in Yure Stone Forest, even by the original Chinese localization. This quest leads you across the countryside near Cheongsa village, chasing rumors of an ancient evil that might soon stir, much like the little hints and Easter eggs dropped for us before the release of Ajdaha's story. It all culminates in the heart of a mountain just outside of the village with a mysterious barrier of light, keeping it sealed off from the outside until you've completed the subsequent quest chain to enter. The Key themselves are described as a race of dragon-like sea monsters that once inhabited Liyue and the sea outside of it. The one sealed near Cheongsa village was said to be so powerful that after a harrowing aerial battle high in the heavens, Rex Lapis had to seal its body parts and aspects of its soul all in different places to keep them separate, and therefore weaken it enough to keep it from rising again. In the place referred to as the Vault within the sealed mountain, there's a strange contraption emitting light that you have to protect from waves of ruin guards once you finally make your way inside in search of the treasure. The object itself bears no real resemblance to, say, the giant ruin guard cords in Sumeru, though its core actually appears to be slightly larger than that. If anything, it slightly resembles the Solar Pearl and definitely harkens to the style of craftsmanship associated with the legendary smith Kunwu, but that's a tentative lead at best. The worst part is that no one ever clears up what the heck this thing is. It resembles a Ruin Guard's Chaos Core, and the Ruin Guards that attacked you seem to be gunning for it, but what does that mean? The only thing I can think of is that perhaps these Ruin Guards have been tasked with getting their hands on this thing for over 500 years ago, much like how a whole fleet of the things can be found on Dragonspine, transmitting their failed attempt to reach the summit and bring the Skyfrost Nail, presumably, back to Conria, for reasons unknown. What is this thing, and will we ever know? Well, Honestly, the location's proximity to what will almost definitely be part of Northern Fontaine, I'm genuinely hoping it'll have something to do with how we bridge our way over there. Fingers crossed we finally get some answers on this mystery that's been staring us in the face since 1.0. And all of that leads me directly into our next primordial dragon. Osail. I think Osail is almost definitely a member of this race of sea dragons, and wouldn't be surprised at all if the source of his grudge against Zhongli has to do with the powerful key that is sealed beneath Changsa village, and or the fact that the Archons displaced them, the original inhabitants of Teyvat, permanently once Celestia started the Archon War. In the original Chinese, Osail is referred to with the same characters usually used that translate directly to demon god, which is in this context used almost exclusively to refer to ancient gods that predate the Archons. One of the first things of note to me is the fact that both Osail's wife, Basht, and his own model bear striking resemblance to the shape of Devalin's head and neck. I'd even argue that in Basht's case, they're the same model with a reskin and some slight tweaks. It's also assumed that the sea monster Beidou is famous for slaying was of the same type as Osail and Basht, so likely a key. When Osail first appears in the cutscene where Tartaglia summons him, a Triskelion like the ones that can be seen in the cores of the Celestial Dales appears on some of his serpentine necks. I think this, along with the fact that the Abyss Order seeks to use Osail in particular to create a mechanized god to fight against Celestia, is the most damning evidence of his status as one of the Ancients. Note also that Devalin was one of their first targets, leading us to believe that perhaps the Abyss Order is seeking out the incarnations of the Sovereigns on purpose, supposing that they might be the only forces in Teyvat with a chance of standing against Celestia. Thinking about this, of course, brings up some questions from recent Archon quests. For all intents and purposes, Piero seems to be in opposition to whatever specific things the leaders of Conria did to incite its fall, and yet Dottore got away with attempting to, and nearly succeeding, in doing exactly what the Abyss Order had set out to do. Honestly, the implications are too many to even think about. It makes my head spin. Back to Osail. In the description of the Vortex Vanquisher's spear, there's also a hint that beings like this can have their own domains, perhaps with the ability to create islands not unlike whatever Orobashi did to create Watatsumi Island, once more hinting at how much of Orobashi's actual skills were borrowed from the Vishaps that came before him. The Vortex Vanquisher's description reads thusly: His was an ancient time, when ships sailed along sea monsters. In those days, Liyue Harbor was not at peace, not from those creatures from the deep. They say that a great shadow once dwelt within the oceanic abyss. With great vortexes and whirlpools, it would smash even the strongest of ships and drag its prey down into the sunless depths. They also say that a divine island would emerge from the sea, rainbow-clad and fog-shrouded. All who are fortunate enough to set foot on that island will find treasures buried for time incalculable. Still others say that this island is a great monster in a threadbare torpor. Most legends that pass between sailors and skippers are such bizarre ones as these, but there is one story that they all believe. They believe that Rex Lapis had once wielded a spear that pierced the rainbow, pinning the churning vortex that had once terrorized the oceans in the center of the deep sea. Legends have it that since then, one can often see dolphins and whales congregate about that patch of ocean, singing. Some hold that they mourn for the god that they revered and sing many a winding dirge for it. Others claim that they do so in awe of Rex Lapis's great power, that he could indeed pierce the rainbow's arc and bring them down the sun. But folk legend also holds this, that one day the vortex consigned to a dead stillness by the Lord of Geo's divine spear will once again begin to wake. When the wind once again brings the stench of the depths on shore, that will be the omen of a hurricane as large as a 9-headed hydra. Who then will be able to subdue that which lies in the deep? This suggests that Osail used the appearance of a rainbow-clad island to lure in sailors to their deaths as they sought the legendary treasure on its shores, but it seems to be a tale that's veracity is unknown in much the same way as the part about the dolphins and whales singing. We don't know if they mourn the loss of Osail or sing of Rex Lapis's great power. I find the line interesting that he could indeed pierce the rainbow's arc and bring them down the sun, as we have legends that come out of both Liyue and Enkanomiya that suggest that during the clash between the Primordial One and the Second who came, the Palace of Stars was destroyed and the sun itself crashed into the chasm as the Moon Sisters turned on each other. Aside from this, we know very little about Osail and can only assume through context clues what I'm proposing, so that's a wrap on that. The way that the world that came before Teyvat as we know it seems to tie back into Rhindotter's research and attempts to create primordial life is something I find myself ruminating on a lot as of late. I think about the art of Chemia itself, now seemingly practiced only by Albedo in its truest form. I think about Albedo's story teaser and how both life forms he paints and brings to life from their image alone are pure elemental beings, a crystal fly and a Vishap. And though it was played for laughs, it seems even a novice alchemist like Sucrose is aware that there are rules and laws in place that they should never overstep as alchemists. Rules that Albedo seems none too keen on following unless prompted by those around him. What Dainsleif says about Albedo in his collected miscellany sticks with me to this day. I am content to watch most crises play out from the sidelines, but if Albedo were ever to make a single wrong move, I could not let myself ignore it. I just can't see an ominous line like that going unfulfilled, and I look forward to the day when Albedo and Dainsleif finally cross paths. The drama will be absolutely delicious. The connections of Chemia to the foundational primordial life of Teyvat are something that I also can't ignore. There has to be some hard line between Chemia, the experiments done on the Baptismal Vishaps, and Gold's creation of Duren and Albedo. While we can make the connection, we lack the context until Hoyoverse decides to drop another lore bomb on us. Dragonspine event, part 3? Anybody? Come on. I hope this theory has opened your eyes to new possibilities and enriched your own perception of the world of Teyvat. But for now, this is, as always, the Hexen Circle, signing off. I hope you'll join us on our next adventure through the lore of Teyvat.